Veronica EQ here for you. And in this wine series, I wanted to go into a little bit more about being aware of what wines taught me with quality and personal preference. And they are not the same when it comes to wine. And oftentimes, it's not the same when it comes to our lives either. So, with wine, I talked a lot about when you're wine tasting, it's part of the experience, and you gather a whole bunch of information. Either you start with a little bit because you're learning, or you then develop your palate more and you get a whole bunch of information from wine. And your last question is this my preference or not? And when I'm talking about a whole bunch of information, there's so much you can tell from the color of wine, if it's white or red, smells, everything. Like you can really develop an extensive list of what you experience with wine, bringing in all the senses, really. And then we get to a point of preference versus quality. And that was a really big light bulb and epiphany for me when that hit. And I kind of mentioned that earlier when I was talking about people who come into the tasting room and they would like ask me what wine I like. And then I'd say, oh, I like this wine, or this is my preference. I got to that point, and then I realized they would be a little disappointed, or they'd feel bad because they weren't confident with wine. And so they felt bad because what their preference wasn't mine. Wine is an individualized experience. It's actually kind of quirky because wine changes because you change. It's very reflective of you and your environment. So that's why when you've had that really great night and that incredible bottle of wine, it was just the best time with your friends, and you just remember it and you go to drink that wine again maybe a week later just to kind of bring back those memories, but you're drinking it and you're like, it's good, but it's not the same. Well, the reality is, can you hear? I have the window open because I wanted to bring in some nature for you. And there's also the road, so you get a little bit of that truck. But yeah, you're different. You're not with your friends. You're not in that same environment. You're not laughing the same. You're not having the same food. So wines change as you change daily. And that in itself is actually a tremendous point to be aware of. You are not the same person you were yesterday. Because when we start reflecting on things, you would react differently. Or if you've been watching my videos, I'm hoping you've been reacting a little bit differently to situations and environments that you've been in. So you're not the same person, and neither is wine. And wine is going to reflect that to you. So when I say that in those tasting room moments, I learned and I grew and would say, this is my preference for X, Y, or Z factors. And I can tell based off of what you've been enjoying and experiencing, it may not be your preference, because I tend to like a specific flavor profile in wine, like a little bit more minerally, for example, which not everybody prefers, and that's a little bit more common in European wines. I'm not as big of a fan typically of heavy oak on like a white wine, with exception. There is one exception. I had an oaked Chardonnay that was aged. And the reason you oak a white wine traditionally is to give it a tannin structure so it can age properly. Whites don't really last for more than 3 years, but like anything in life and in the wine industry, there are exceptions to all things. Fiano white wine is one of my favorites, and it does actually have a structure enough to be able to age pretty well. So yeah, you start becoming aware, especially when I was working with people, of your preference. And then I could tell enough about somebody else's preference to help let them be comfortable in not liking the wine or not preferring the wine that I prefer, because we're different people. And then going back to that awareness, like you're a different person each time you drink it. Yeah, you are. And just because you like something, I hate to break it to you, doesn't mean it's a quality wine. And just because it's a $50 bottle does not mean it's a quality wine. And I'll be real with you, I have had $3,000 bottles of wine. And again, in that process of enjoying that, well, I'm going to say enjoying a little loosely, but experiencing that wine, there we go, experiencing that wine, it was an incredibly quality wine. Tannin, balance, the structure of the wine, everything about it was very quality. And was not my preference. It was so not my preference. But again, in part of experiencing wine, you need to kind of gauge that. And then I have wines, again, because I had experience. I drank a lot. I tasted a lot. It's actually the more appropriate way to say that. I tasted a lot to have that discernment of wines that are, good quality. They're good quality wines, but maybe more in that $15 price point. But they're not great quality wines, but they're good quality wines. there is a huge difference. So just because you like a wine and it is your preference, please be aware that does not mean it's anybody else's preference or that it's quality. There's a huge delineation in that. And why I bring that up in a spiritual context. Can you gather? It's that same awareness. Because when we put a structure, when we put like, don't like, we become rigid. And we now actually socially put ourselves in a very awkward position, because if somebody else doesn't like what you like, now you're kind of inadvertently at odds. It's a subconscious thing that happens. And then they question, like, that happens enough and people are like, I don't know, this person and I don't like a lot of the same things. Why are we even talking our friends? But if you're like, hey, this is my preference to be an adrenaline junkie. Do you want to come join me? Quite honestly, no, that's not my preference. But where can we find some middle ground of what we can do together? Or whatever that is. It makes it a lot more approachable and again, less rigid. And that's what we're looking for, because we're very dynamic creatures as human beings. And black and white and rigidity, there are some moments in time that's appropriate, but not often. And so in that, wine was a great teacher for me in that our preference and quality are not the same things. They're not. You may have a preference for sweets. I will tell you, sugar and happiness run the exact same neural pathways. So if you have a really big sweet tooth, I'm going to question you as a practitioner and say, where's the happiness in your life? Where is that coming from? How can we amplify that so maybe you don't need as much sugar? Because at the end of the day, sugar is not great for us. I'm not saying don't have some, but if you know, and you know when you have a sweet tooth, that may be your preference, but that's not a quality, healthy practice for you and your body or your mental and emotional well-being. So it's a funny little thing, but again, just in a wine series of wanting to bring that forth of how much I learned from wine, that was a really, really big one. So thank you so much for joining me, and I look forward to seeing you in another one.